Welcome to the EdTech Throwdown. Join us, Eric Geis and Nick Johnson, as we dive into today's best EdTech tools, tips, and practices. We do the research so you can teach your class. Remember to follow us on social media like Instagram, X, or Facebook by looking for the handle @EdTech Throwdown. Now please enjoy the show.
Welcome to the EdTech Throwdown. This is episode 172 called Student-Centered Learning is Not the Same as Universal Design for Learning. In this episode, we'll talk about the similarities and differences between SCL and UDL, as well as some best practices that support both of these really awesome teaching strategies. This is another episode you don't want to miss. Check it out.
All right, back with episode 172. Today was the first day of school. We were here. We've already had one minor scheduling change. We found out that we were having a half day today because of some water issue. So this is a rare time where you and I can sit down and record a podcast midway through the afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, we were all joking that literally one day in, first day that students are present in the building, and we've already essentially have like an early dismissal. They called it a half day for the plumbing issue, which is, honestly, I loved having the half day on the first day of school. We have very short periods. You just kind of got through all the nuts and bolts with the students and then let them get out of here and gave us some time in the afternoon. So I'm pretty pumped on it, to be honest with you. Although it does think the school's trying to take care of that plumbing problem, so hopefully that gets resolved. But from the teacher perspective, can't complain. Something tells me the students don't mind too much either. So yeah, it's been an interesting start. And I was curious, you're going to, in a bit, I'm sure you'll tell us more, but this PD that you went to, when did you even do this thing? How did you squeeze that in? I mean, we have barely even started school yet, and you're already attending different sessions around.
Well, it was virtual, so
still,
I will say that. And so just like we're part of the Teach Better podcast network, I'm also a Teach Better ambassador. And basically, it's an application. Those applications probably will be coming out shortly. So go over to Teach Better Ambassadors on their website and make sure you sign up if this is something you're interested in. But basically, it's a group of educators. We want to make a difference. And it's ran by like a subdivision. Andrea is my contact point person. She's amazing. She really puts together these hangouts where the ambassadors just go talk about things that are happening in their district. You hang out, you do that, but they also have these professional development opportunities. And just because of my situation in life over the summer changed a lot over the last 2 years. I've been struggling to get to these PD sessions, but when I do, they're absolutely phenomenal. And when they offer any type of a playback or something like that, or if they're offering other PD opportunities that are, videotaped and I'm able to go back and get to them, I definitely do because they're amazing. So this program is really awesome. It has helped not only connect me with the other educators, but I mean, the people that facilitate the professional development are really amazing minds in education, and they get you thinking and reflecting, which is good. And this one was done by Kyle Wagner, and his PD session was called Simple Shifts for Student-Centered Environments. And I really enjoyed this one because, as Nick and I have shown over the past 5 years, we're really big into UDL, we're really big into student-centered learning, basically giving students the ability to have autonomy and try to set them up for success while they take control of their learning. And this PD kind of went over 12 simple shifts you could do to move from a teacher-led to a student-led environment. And I found an article that Kyle wrote out on the internet, so I copied that into the show notes so you could check it out. You could also go to kylewagner.net, get some other resources, and he wrote a book called The Power of Simple. Transform your school by conquering the standards, individualized learning, and creating a community of innovators. So you could check out those resources, but the professional development was pretty awesome, and it really is the basis of this podcast episode.
Yeah, I think it's great. If you want to sort of get a flavor of the PD that you squeezed in over the summer, and I highly recommend everybody listening does that, check out the article. It's the first of the 3 that are linked. It's literally called 12 Shifts to Move from Teacher-Led to Student-Led, and I'm just going to go through the first shift. I'm not going to do all these for time, but it gives you an idea of one of the things we're talking about today, like what student-centered can mean. Without reading it word for word, he gives an example of a teacher at a school in Ohio who had to teach a standard related to ancient civilizations and how, I don't want to use the word boring because it can be super exciting, but that's how it felt, at least in the old teacher-led way, right? Nobody was excited. The teacher wasn't excited. The students picked up on that. They certainly didn't care. Imagine walking into a room and on the screen you just see the words ancient civilizations. That would be very dry, right? And then the teacher goes into, okay, today we're going to learn about Mesopotamia, whatever. Well, instead, if you wanted to flip that, right? If you wanted to shift a little bit, instead you push out a Google form, ask the students to choose an ancient civilization they have heard of that they've always been curious about. Or if it needs to be certain ones, if you have to say the civilizations they're learning, you could give them a list and have them vote on the ones that they've heard about. Have them pose questions, or you throw some questions out there, brainstorm some questions. I think in the beginning of this article, the question that was selected by the students were, what impact do contributions from the past have on our lives today? The point is that now the curriculum, the civilizations, the content, the question to be answered has been co-selected by the students, of course, facilitated by the teacher. But that's some simple stuff, right? That's probably something that we could all do with whatever different teaching standards you've got to cover. You could begin that way for at least a part of your school year. And that's just one of 12, right? There's 11 more of those in this article. And I think it does a nice job of kind of letting people know how great this can be and what student-centered learning is all about.
Yeah, I think you did a nice job at exploring that first shift. And they're not all like super time consuming. I mean, that's an easy shift there. And we're not saying that we need to make everything student-centered. I think that's something that is often assumed, but in this case, we're not going there. We're just saying, if we make some of these shifts, it might be able to help engage our students. Yeah,
I mean, here's how another, just not to dwell on this too much, but a lot of people I can still feel like it would be, as you put it, a massive shift and, oh my gosh, we got a student center. It can be these very simple things. Like my second chemistry unit is a unit on bonding, where I would, typically come in and, okay, today we're going to learn about covalent bonding. And then the next day, ionic bonding. And then the next day, here's how you draw a Lewis structure. Well, just a simple flip of, okay, class, here's a list of 50 different substances, each with different bonding types, is put together by me. Everybody pick one and prepare a report or a poster or a video or something that delves into your molecule. You are going to be the expert, the salesman, the PSA developer for your molecule or substance. And by the way, in doing so, you need to draw the Lewis structure for that, talk about the bonding that takes place within there. And then all of a sudden, they have had some choice in that curriculum. They have chosen the molecule they're learning about, but also gaining an understanding of the bonding within these things.
So how would they get the content for that? How would they know what an ionic or covalent bond is? Well, you could simply just have another resource there that they can use to figure that out. They don't have to necessarily go out on their own. Maybe you have a 15-second or a minute-long video that shows an ionic bond, what it is and how it works. And that's it. And they look at it and they could go, oh, yeah, I have 2 nonmetals here. It's definitely covalent. So I need to pay attention to the covalent one and go look at that video. So A lot of good stuff from this PD session. The best PD sessions are ones that, in my opinion, that you could leave there, reflect on it, and have a conversation about it, but also is one that you leave with something. And Kyle shared this infographic with us that kind of broke down the 12 shifts that he was talking about. So I was able to leave with that and apply it to my own classroom. So I think that's awesome.
All right. So, you and I could probably do the whole episode just bouncing back and forth on different ways to make this student-centered shift. But, just check out some of these resources in our show notes from Kyle Wagner. Just give that name a Google, and I'm sure you'll find them. But we got to pause just for a quick word from the Teach Better Podcast Network, of course. And when we come back, we'll get a little bit deeper into this, but more within the realm of comparing these two things, the student-centered learning that you brought through this PD, but compared to the universal design for learning. And we'll sort of go back and forth comparing and contrasting these two strategies.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
All right, so we're back, and I think I'm going to kick it off just sort of giving a broad strokes comparison, like almost definition of these two things, student-centered versus universal design. And then we'll bounce back and forth and just do some differences, some similarities. This is a slightly different episode than we typically do because the focus here is more on, content-wise, how do you compare these strategies, and the EdTech, I don't want to say it's going to take more of a back seat, but we'll just kind of pepper that in on the fly as we go. So this is more informational, let's say, which is a nice change for us. But let me kick it off with just like what these are. So first, obviously, these are both different educational approaches. You could teach using SCL, student-centered learning, as a strategy. You could teach using UDL, universal design for learning, as a strategy. Both of them are trying to enhance student engagement, right? They're, as you'll see, giving students lots of different choice and ways to be a part of this. But the point now, what we need to get into now, is exactly how are they different? And we have pinpointed some specific ways that they actually are different from each other, so you can start understanding maybe which you might want to do or what might fit better with a certain topic that you have to teach this school year.
Yeah, go ahead, kick us off with those definitions, and we'll get right into it.
All right, so the first major thing here that we're looking at as far as a difference is that the primary focus of the two things are going to sound the same, but are technically not, right? So in student-centered learning, the focus really is on student choice. The students are empowered to take charge of their learning, and if you don't really know what that means, contextually think back to that first shift that I recapped about the ancient civilizations, right? The students got to choose literally like what they were going to do, and a big part of that can of course be goal setting. Whereas in universal design for learning, it's similar, but the focus really is on how accessible is that content, how inclusive is that content, where the actual lesson design of the different types of things that are available for the students to access the content are so varied that it can meet lots of different ability levels or learning types right from the beginning. Of course, because your students have different strengths and different weaknesses, and UDL sort of meets that. So,
yeah, both of these focuses can be very strategic in your classroom. They could promote different styles of learning, I guess. But the difference is in the student-centered, the students are really making the choices. And whereas the, UDL, the teacher pre-plans to encompass all learners. I guess that's the summary of those two bullets. And I really like how you brought in goal setting with student-centered learning. I think it's very important for that to take place. What are the goals of that student for that project to show that they've mastered the content? So having that there, I think, is important. And getting to know your students' strengths and weaknesses, you could do that in multiple different ways. You could have them take a survey. I like to learn better visually. I learn better auditory. I like to learn through videos or group work or individual. You can get a survey, have them take it, and that's going to help you learn some of those things. But you also have to know what makes them tick, like what interests them. Are they a sports person? Are they a theater, music, whatever it may be, and incorporate that in. So I think the primary focus is a great place to start with this. But the next one is the approach to the curriculum. So in student-centered learning, students will have significant input into the curriculum. They could choose topics of interest. They explore personal learning goals. And it's just all this encompasses a more personalized learning experience where UDL is still set by the teacher, but the teacher keeps the learner's mind, or the learners in mind throughout the whole process. So it anticipates certain things like diverse needs, and it provides students with multiple ways of getting the same information, demonstrating the same knowledge, and basically it helps the students stay engaged by exploring those things. Now, with UDL, a great one that goes with it is a choice board. Okay, so making several options for students to have the ability to show that they understand or they've mastered the content. And you could create these choice boards on Slides Mania. That's a oldie but a goodie with Paula. And then Canva, there are some templates there. You can make your own Google Slides. You could have a tic-tac-toe board. You could have a learning menu, whatever it may be. There are tons of these out there and tons of ways to support your UDL classroom through a choice board.
Yeah, so this was really helpful for me to kind of wrap my head around at least one of the differences between these two things. If you use choice boards in your classroom, that's likely they're fairly common. Most teachers are aware of and use these things. And if you do that, you might have thought you were doing student-centered learning, and it's not to say that you're not. But I think at its core, the choice board would fall under UDL just because what it's providing are the different options that students have to access that material, right? So let's say it's a bingo board, and in one corner is a video to watch, but another corner is a transcript of that video. Maybe another one is an article that's at the reading level the students should be at, and then another one is the same article, but where you've used DIFIT to bring it down to a lower reading level in case some students in your classroom, are at that lower reading level, or if they are. Point is, giving those options to access the same content as chosen by you, that technically makes it UDL, right? Is that sort of what we're saying the difference is here for curriculum?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah. So that's a nice, clear example, and there's just so many great resources out there for both of those things. As far as the teacher's role for these things, this one can be hard to tease apart. I don't know if maybe I still have to wrap my head around it a bit, but here's what we know. In a student-centered learning classroom, the teacher truly is the facilitator to help students navigate that learning path. Remember, they have some say in what they're learning and setting those goals, and you have to facilitate that with different levels of, paying attention to that depending on how loose or tight your curriculum is, right? But you really need to be that guide. We always used to call it the guide on the side. That is key. Whereas in UDL, you're not really facilitating the content they're learning. You are, however, putting together the different ways that they will access that material. So, as I'm saying it out loud, I'm like, yeah, of course, those are two different things. My fear in explaining this to people is that you could always throw out examples where there's going to be some overlap here. And if you are thinking that, you're totally correct. There can absolutely be a lot of overlap between these two things, but that is like the difference as far as the teacher's role goes.
Yeah, the teacher's role, in my opinion, is basically making sure that the students are hitting these mile markers or these checkpoints. All right. So, I mean, if a student chooses their learning based on their interest, you still need to make sure those fundamental concepts within your content is present somewhere in that learning. So giving students a curated list of resources that might help them explore their topic, that would be a good facilitator or guide on the side's role. All right, the student is struggling because they don't understand how photosynthesis can fit into their interest, which is nutrition. So how can that teacher give resources to that student that will help get them on track or ask a certain type of question? Questioning is a big thing within student-centered learning. Having these resources available to them when they need it is a big part of student-centered learning. Whereas in UDL, there's nothing being prescribed or nothing being chosen by the student other than the method in which they want to learn. So the teacher will provide these different ways of learning the same type of prescribed content. So if my lesson was on photosynthesis, all right, is there a video that will help them get the same information as an article or as a podcast episode? That's the difference to me. It's really just, I don't know, it's simple as that, I guess. I mean, in student-centered learning, you're providing them with resources to help channel their own learning efforts, whereas UDL, you're still prescribing stuff. However, you're giving them options in the way that they're going to learn it.
And to put this in the most concrete terms, if you want some specifics, right? For UDL teacher role, you are the one that is making the choice board. You're the one that is making the learning menu, which is cool. If you've never seen learning menus, it's like a menu that you go to a restaurant, picture like an appetizer, a main course, and a dessert, but all the things listed within each of those sections are different parts of the lesson, the thing the kids have to learn. So you could tell them from the menu, you have to choose one appetizer, one main course, and one dessert. Each is a different way to learn something or show what you've learned. You're the one that is building the playlist. Let's just say you've got a Google Doc with 10 different things, 10 different links, and the students have to go through and complete whatever each of those is. If you're building that, that's UDL. Whereas the SCL teacher is, more curating things to meet those different student paths. Which could be on a website in Google, or maybe a Canvas site if you want to make it look a little bit fancy, or go simpler, put together a Google slide deck that helps to monitor that path. Wakelet and Padlet, also classic choices. These are big popular tools that we're listing here because those are the things that are going to meet that best, we thought, putting this together. But, it's so simple, that difference in the teacher's role. The hard part really is, for me, and I think a lot of people, the overlap. Certainly there are things you could do that would fall in both camps. But you got to try to not get caught up in that when you're thinking about the difference in this way. So, yeah.
What's good for students is good for students.
Right.
Don't get caught up at, I got to stay out of UDL's pathway and I got to make sure I just stay in student-centered learning. It's not the case. If you could justify that it's a positive step for the students, don't be afraid to use it. All right, let's get our last one in here before we go over some similarities, which we kind of addressed, so we'll go over those pretty quickly. And the last difference is adaptability versus design. So in student-centered learning, adaptability comes through student choice and differentiation based on student preference. So what is the student interest? That interest is going to drive the learning. In UDL, it's more about designing lessons from the beginning to be adaptable to all students without needing to make adjustments later. We want an all-encompassing lesson that will teach the honor student versus the kid that needs help, like the resource student or a special education student or anything in between. Okay, so, and really, there could be a special education student that is in honors. I mean, that's very common. They might be twice exceptional. Any of these, could be a part of the journey in a UDL classroom. All right, so that's wrapping up the differences. Let's get into the similarities. And if we haven't been able to emphasize this enough, the first one should be pretty easy, and it's focusing on student engagement. In both of them, it aims actively to engage students in the learning process by either catering to their individual needs, looking at their preferences or their interests in how they learn or what they're learning.
Yeah, this for me all comes together with these similarities, and I like how you pointed out, when we're still doing some differences, what's good for students is good for students. That's the point of all this. Like, at the end of the day, I was going to close this whole episode with, okay, so that's the difference between these two strategies, and then say, does it matter? You know what I mean? Like, both of these things are good for students when you do them in the right way. So it's not worth getting caught up about like, oh no, which of them am I doing? These are all good things. They all increase student engagement, whether they're choosing part of the content themselves based on their interests, or whether they're choosing how they access it. It's all good, man. Both of those things work in excellent ways and with excellent outcomes. So this is a nice way to kind of close it out. The next one applies to that as well. They're similar in just the flexibility they offer, right? Of course, SCL is giving the students choice in what they're learning, while the UDL is giving the different, the means, the different ways that they can accommodate that. And, the flexibility is there in both clearly, but just different ways.
All right, let's just hop right into the next one, which is to promote independence. They both do this. They encourage students to take ownership of their learning. In SCL, students make choices to set goals. In UDL, students become self-regulated learners through scaffolding and options. All right. Some notes I put for this bullet here is that we need to have check-ins. In both cases, we need to have check-ins. We need to make sure the students are where they need to be. You can do this through conferencing, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous conferencing in person versus maybe just typing, a couple sentences of what they were up to and what they did that day. Personal reflections. This is one that I like. If students are into journaling or something like that, they can say what they accomplished, how they felt about it, what they're struggling with, things along those lines. You could always do peer feedback depending where you are in this learning journey. If you're doing some type of final project for that, particular content topic, you could ask them to share with peers and get some peer feedback. Or you could do formative assessment. If you're at the very beginning of the journey or somewhere in the middle, you could use quizzes, Gimkit, Quizlet, Bluekit, and Quizalize. I always do that, but I caught myself. So these are some of the digital formative assessment tools that you could use to help promote independence and, self-guided learning.
And then, the last one, which almost goes without saying after all this, but it's worth pointing out, both, of course, offer a more inclusive classroom. If the students are participating in something that's like a little bit more SCL, of course, it's more inclusive because it is taking into consideration their interests and what they like and how that relates to, the goals of this course. Whereas in UDL, it's more inclusive because the student who maybe needs some, support with auditory material has it. And the student that needs some support with written material has it. And it's all there built in from the beginning. Neither of those is good or bad. They're just different ways to make that lesson more inclusive. So I'm pretty sure that's the last one we have here as far as similarities. And we've also covered the differences. And at the end of all this, I think it's important to remember all good things, because both of these do all of those, will bring all those positives to your classroom.
Yeah, one thing I want to mention, and this is almost always brought up anytime that we start talking about this, is people think that this needs to take a long time. All right. I've heard the term chunking. I've heard the term micro-organizing. I've heard other terms as well, but really, you could get through a UDL lesson or a student-centered learning lesson in one class period. So it doesn't need to be this huge elaborate project. Does not need to be there. And you don't need to run your entire course on a certain method of teaching. You could use a UDL lesson for this one. You could go over here, use a case study. Here you could lecture. Mix and match. It keeps that, sometimes your students really need schedule. They need consistency. And if that's the case, you could stay within the same realms. But if the class feels a little flat, change it up. Do a flipped lesson. Just change it up is what I'm saying. All right, so we're going to leave you with 2 resources. And I found both of these online as I was prepping for this episode. The first one is a little infographic. It's student-centered learning principles. It's brought to you by thirdspacelearning.com. I really like this one. It just says student-centered principles in the middle, and then there's these little, it almost looks like an atom, basically. And these are the principles. It needs to be adaptable, constructivism, student voice, empowering, collaborative, active learning, and authentic. So these are all different principles found within student-centered learning. If you click on the infographic or on the resource hyperlink, that will take you to like a little ebook or article that's going to really dive into student-centered learning and provide you with some examples.
And then the second resource is more about UDL. If you go down the road of Universal Design for Learning and what it is, you'll see that there are 3 sort of main, there is an official word for these, but 3 main components, I'll call them, to a UDL lesson. And the graphic that we've got here lists those 3 out. They are engagement, representation, and action and expression. Just, in terms of our episode, we don't have time to get into exactly the differences between those 2 things, but when you're designing a true UDL lesson, you're going to have to take each of them into account and build in, options within each of those categories. And this really helps to break it down and give specifics on each of those things. I'll also throw out there that if you really want to wrap your head around some of this, start researching, and we're not going to get into it now, don't worry, the difference between UDL and differentiated instruction. Because if you're like me and you listen to UDL giving kids shorts, you're like, oh, that's just differentiation. I've been doing that for 20 years. Technically, no. There is even a difference between those 2 things, and you can read all about it, just like I tried to do and then promptly stopped because it was too much in prep for this episode. It's just cool to kind of tease out all of the similarities and differences between these different strategies. The best part about it always is you end up learning more that you can bring to your practice. So I'm pretty excited to do an episode like this and just talk methodology for a change. I think that probably wraps it up for this episode. So let's close it out by, of course, telling everyone, as always, thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening to the EdTech Throwdown. Do us a couple of favors. Subscribe to our podcast on any major podcast catcher such as Apple, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, and Stitcher. Go over to YouTube, search the EdTech Throwdown, subscribe to the channel. You can connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. The show's handle is EdTech Throwdown. You can connect with Geis at GeisGotTech, Nick at NickGotTech. You can write us an Apple Podcast review. You could tell your friends about www.edtechthrowdown.com. And lastly, go over and check out our friends over at the Teach Better Podcast Network, a network that we are so proudly involved with. Until next time, remember, go try some EdTech because we will do the research so you can teach your class.